Caracas witnessed a strange scene last weekend. Long lines of people not to buy food or fuel, but to heed the call of President Maduro. After tough moves from President Trump, the Venezuelan leader asked the people to stand up and do something important. What is that? And could it change the course of the U.S.-Venezuela confrontation? In South America, Venezuela entered a new phase of tension when the United States increased military presence in the Caribbean Sea. On April 1st, 2020, President Donald Trump's administration launched one of the largest naval operations in the Western Hemisphere, with the participation of amphibious assault ships such as USS Iwo Jima, USS San Antonio, USS Fort Lauderdale, carrying more than 4,500 Marine sailors and support troops, totaling about 22,000 forces in the region. Washington explained this as a campaign against transnational drug trafficking groups targeting transport routes across the Caribbean and the Pacific. However, the Caracas government strongly opposed it, arguing that this operation was just a diplomatic shield to conceal a plan to overthrow President Nicolás Maduro. It should be recalled that not long before the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Maduro and several senior Venezuelan officials on charges of drug terrorism while offering a $50 million reward for anyone providing information leading to his capture. This was one of the largest bounties ever applied by the United States to a sitting head of state. Venezuela was in deep crisis inflation of thousands of percent shortages of food, fuel, and medicine. Yet Washington's move did not weaken Caracas. On the contrary, it pushed the government to rally its forces. Maduro's administration saw this as a direct threat to sovereignty and national survival, and so issued an urgent nationwide call. On August 21st, 2025, right after the U.S. deployed 3 destroyers near the Caribbean waters, President Nicolás Maduro made an urgent appeal to the people. He declared that Venezuela needed a people's army where anyone from workers, teachers, students to retirees could take up arms to defend the homeland. Maduro emphasized only when every citizen becomes part of the national strength will Venezuela truly be invincible. Not stopping there, on August 19, 2025, the Venezuelan leader announced a shocking goal: 4.5 million militia members would be deployed nationwide. This figure was repeated in many of his speeches as proof that the entire nation was united against the invasion plot from outside. Although independent experts estimated the real number was only about 300,000 to 400,000 people, mostly civilian recruits, this exaggeration clearly carried more political than military meaning, a message to the world that Venezuela was a unified bloc ready to sacrifice to defend its territory. A special point in his call was the organization of militias by profession, with the striking slogan, "Arming farmers with rifles and missiles." Maduro wanted to turn all social classes into specialized battalions: workers guarding factories, students protecting schools, farmers defending fields. This ambition particularly targeted rural areas, which make up more than 30% of Venezuela's population, in order to create a wide network of people's defense. The image of poor farmers now turned into armed fighters alongside the army carried strong symbolism, recalling people's war strategies in world history. Alongside mobilizing the people, Caracas also deployed modern military measures. On August 26th and 27th, 2025, the government unveiled a plan for patrols using warships and unmanned aerial vehicles or drones across the territory and Caribbean waters. These devices not only monitored borders, but were also integrated to coordinate with militias in training and defense. This was seen as a step to offset the lack of heavy weapons in the regular army, while sending the message that Venezuela was not backward in defense technology. From these 4 pillars, it can be seen that Maduro's strategy was a 2-pronged attack. On one hand, mobilizing the entire population into a massive militia force. On the other hand, strengthening military power and modern surveillance capability. Slogans such as "rifles and missiles for farmers" served both as political symbols and psychological weapons, affirming that no power could easily set foot in Venezuela. Meanwhile, the deployment of warships and drones showed a practical determination ready to respond to any pressure from the United States. Clearly, through this powerful call, Caracas wanted to prove to the world that Venezuela was not alone, and even in crisis, they still had the capacity to defend themselves against all external threats. So, how did the Venezuelan people respond to President Maduro's call and strategy of nationwide mobilization? President Maduro's call quickly sparked a wave of responses across Venezuela. In Caracas, as well as many other cities, long lines of people formed not to buy food or fuel, but to register for the militia. At Bolivar Square, the political and historical heart of the capital, civil servants, teachers, students, and even retirees stepped up to swear an oath before the national flag amid the echo of slogans, "Homeland forever," "No empire shall ever set foot on this land again." That solemn yet vibrant atmosphere spread so fast that recruitment centers had to expand to many locations, even inside the Miraflores presidential palace, the symbol of supreme national power. It did not stop at registration. The new militia recruits were immediately put into basic training programs. Each session often began with documentary footage recalling past interventions and blockades meant to awaken memories of resistance against foreign aggression. After that, they were trained in essential skills from defense formation organization to handling personal weapons. Throughout the sessions, anti-US slogans echoed, constantly accompanied by declarations that Venezuela will be the place where the domination of an empire ends. By combining military training with political indoctrination, Maduro's government turned this volunteer movement into a force that was both equipped with basic skills and carrying national symbolism. With the image of every citizen ready to join the ranks, the militia movement not only strengthened unity, but also revived national pride in a moment of great tension. President Nicolás Maduro often affirmed that the Bolivarian national militia was the power of the entire people, especially in the context of tensions with the United States and Washington's military presence in the Caribbean. However, independent statistics showed that the actual number was only about 343,000 people, including new recruits still in training, far below the official figures. This reflected a clear gap between propaganda image and real deployment capacity. This discrepancy reflected Caracas' strategy, exaggerating the scale to ignite national spirit and create a deterrent effect abroad. In reality, most militia members came from civilian backgrounds, joined only short-term training courses, and operated in shifts, making it difficult to form a unified combat force nationwide. Nevertheless, from a strategic perspective, announcing such a large number still produced a strong psychological effect, helping Maduro's government maintain the image of a populous, united country ready to defend its territory. Thus, under U.S. military pressure, the Venezuelan militia, though limited in real combat capacity, still served as a tool of propaganda and diplomacy, contributing to a counterbalance and affirming Caracas' determination. Before the United States increased pressure and deployed military forces, how did the actual role and scale of the Venezuelan militia reflect Caracas' ability to respond? At the same tense moment, the U.S. government continuously increased pressure on Caracas. On August 20th, 2025, the U.S. Department of Justice announced a record $50 million reward for any information leading to the arrest of President Nicolás Maduro, accusing him of being a drug terrorist kingpin connected to transcontinental narcotics networks. This was one of the highest bounties Washington had ever applied to a sitting head of state, showing U.S. determination to isolate and overthrow Maduro's government. At the same time, the Pentagon declared the launch of naval operations in the Caribbean, claiming the main goal was to prevent drug trafficking activities. 3 destroyers along with thousands of Marines were deployed near Venezuelan waters, marking the largest military escalation in the region since the crises of the early 2000s. For its part, Caracas immediately rejected all accusations. Maduro's government called U.S. actions immoral, illegal, and a threat to regional peace. In official statements, Caracas emphasized that Washington's deployment of military forces and bounty on a head of state was a blatant violation of international law and the United Nations Charter, which affirms the principles of sovereignty, equality among nations, and people's right to self-determination. From there, the US-Venezuela confrontation became direct. Washington increased legal, political, and military pressure, while Caracas responded by mobilizing the entire people and denouncing before international opinion. The crisis had moved beyond diplomacy, approaching the risk of an actual armed conflict. Inside Venezuela, the reaction of the opposition went in a completely different direction. Opposition leaders urged the people not to join the militia force, claiming that President Maduro's call only served propaganda purposes and was meant to maintain power. They emphasized that the current government had lost the support of most senior generals in the military, while warning that arming civilians could bring more instability instead of protecting peace. However, in reality, the image of long lines of people flocking to registration centers from Bolivar Square to military barracks and even the Miraflores presidential palace reflected another scenario. At least in terms of image and propaganda, Maduro's government had succeeded in showing broad participation, thereby countering the argument that he had completely lost popular support. On the regional level, the confrontation became more complicated when Trinidad and Tobago openly sided with Washington. The prime minister of this country clearly declared if Venezuela attacked Guyana in the Essequibo territorial dispute, the United States would be allowed to use Trinidad's territory to help defend Guyana. This statement was not only a bilateral security commitment, but also a signal that neighboring countries were beginning to choose sides in the crisis. This made the situation no longer limited to a US-Venezuela confrontation, but at risk of expanding into a regional tension. With the involvement of neighboring countries, especially in the Caribbean and South America, the scenario of military escalation became a real danger, placing the entire region before challenges of security and political stability. The US-Venezuela confrontation showed no sign of cooling down. American warships continued to approach the coast. Venezuelan militia forces were steadily strengthened, while neighboring countries gradually chose sides. This situation left an open-ended question: will the next chapter in US-Venezuela tensions be written with the pen of diplomacy or with the fire of bullets? If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the latest analyses.